The air was thick with anticipation, the kind that hums before a storm. I stood at the altar, my white dress catching the soft glow of chandeliers, my heart pounding like it might break free. Everyone was watching, smiling, whispering. But then I heard it, a hiss, sharp and venomous, from my mother-in-law's lips. "You'll ruin him!" Those words sliced through the joy like a blade. Before I could process it, my dad grabbed the mic, his face unreadable, and what he said next left every guest frozen in their seats. Hey, before we dive into this wild story, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from, your city, your country, anywhere in the world. It means so much to connect with you all. Now let's get into it. My name is Emma, and this was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Charleston, South Carolina, was glowing that June afternoon. The venue, a charming low-country estate draped in Spanish moss, felt like something out of a dream. The scent of magnolias floated through the air, mixing with the salty breeze from the nearby coast. Guests fanned themselves with paper programs, their laughter bubbling over the clink of champagne glasses. It was picture perfect, the kind of wedding you'd pin on a vision board. But beneath the surface, something was simmering. Something I didn't see coming. Let me take you back to the start of that day. I was in the bridal suite, my hands trembling as my best friend Sarah adjusted my veil. My dress, a fitted lace gown, hugged my frame, and I caught my reflection in the mirror. A nervous bride, but a happy one. I was marrying James, my college sweetheart, the man who made me laugh until my sides ached, who held my hand through every storm. He was steady, kind, with warm brown eyes that felt like home. We'd been together 5 years, and I thought I knew everything about him. I thought I knew his family, too. James's family was there, of course. His mother, Linda, sat in the front row, her lips pressed into a tight smile. She was elegant in her navy dress, her silver hair swept into a perfect updo, but her eyes, they were sharp, like she was sizing me up. I'd always felt her judgment, ever since James introduced us. She'd make little comments about my job as a graphic designer, about my small-town upbringing in Ohio, about how I wasn't quite what she pictured for her son. I brushed it off. I loved James, and he loved me. That was enough. Or so I thought. His sister Claire was there too, a bridesmaid in pale blue, giggling with the others but throwing me glances I couldn't quite read. Then there was my family. My dad, Michael, a gruff but tender man who'd raised me alone after Mom passed when I was 10. He was my rock, sitting proudly in his suit, his eyes misty every time he looked at me. My cousins, aunts, and uncles filled the pews, their warmth wrapping around me like a hug. Friends from college, co-workers, neighbors, everyone was there, beaming, ready to celebrate. But even in that sea of smiles, I felt it. A tension, like a thread pulled too tight. Maybe it was the way Linda whispered to Claire during the rehearsal dinner, their heads bent close, their eyes darting to me. Maybe it was how James seemed quieter than usual that morning, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. I told myself it was nerves. Weddings are stressful, right? Everyone's on edge. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. As I walked down the aisle, my arm looped through Dad's, I tried to focus on James. He stood tall in his black tux, his grin wide as he watched me approach. The string quartet played softly, and the crowd sighed in unison. It was the moment I'd dreamed of. But then, just as I reached the altar, I caught Linda's voice. Low, meant only for Claire, but clear enough for me to hear. "She'll ruin him." My stomach dropped. I froze, my bouquet trembling in my hands. James didn't hear it, but Dad did. His grip on my arm tightened, his jaw set. I glanced at him, and his eyes were fire. The ceremony began, but those words echoed in my head. Ruin him? Me? The girl who'd spent years building a life with James, who'd supported him through law school, who'd loved him fiercely. I wanted to turn around, to demand an explanation, but the officiant was speaking, and the guests were watching. I swallowed the hurt, forced a smile, and kept going. But the seed was planted, and it was growing fast. As we exchanged vows, I noticed more. Claire's smirk as she held my bouquet. The way Linda's smile never reached her eyes. The whispers from the back rows. Guests, maybe friends of James's family, murmuring things I couldn't hear but could feel. My heart raced. What did they know that I didn't? Was there something about James, about me, about us that I'd missed? The weight of it pressed on my chest, but I held it together. I said, I do, and James did too, his voice steady but his hands shaking as he slipped the ring on my finger. The reception was next, and that's when things started to unravel. The ballroom was stunning, twinkling lights, white roses, a dance floor gleaming under chandeliers. Guests mingled, toasting to our future. But the tension followed us. Linda sat at the head table, her eyes tracking me like a hawk. Claire was louder now, laughing too hard at something a cousin said, her wine glass always full. And James. He was trying, but I could see it. He was distracted, glancing at his mom, at his sister, at the crowd. Then came the speeches. Sarah went first, her words sweet and funny, making everyone laugh. My dad was next, his voice thick with emotion as he talked about raising me, about how proud he was. But when Linda stood, glass in hand, the room shifted. Her smile was tight, her tone syrupy. To James, she said, my perfect son, may you always find happiness. The pause before happiness felt like a slap. Guests clapped, but it was hesitant, like they sensed the edge in her voice. I looked at Dad. His face was stone, his hand gripping his glass. I knew that look. He was done staying quiet. And that's when it happened. He stood, grabbed the mic, and the room fell silent. What he said next would change everything. The ballroom was alive with the clatter of plates and the hum of conversation, but it felt like the air had thickened, like everyone was holding their breath. My dad stood there, mic in hand, his broad shoulders squared, his eyes locked on Linda. The guests leaned forward, their smiles fading into curiosity, some into unease. I glanced at James, whose face had gone pale, his hand frozen around his glass. Whatever was about to happen, it wasn't part of the plan. Dad's voice boomed through the speakers, steady but laced with something sharp. I've listened to a lot of speeches tonight, he began, his gaze never leaving Linda. Lots of talk about love, about family, but there's one thing I can't let slide. He paused, letting the silence stretch, heavy and suffocating. My heart pounded so loud I swore the room could hear it. When someone says my daughter, my Emma, is gonna ruin someone, I've got something to say about that. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Heads turned, eyes darting between Dad, Linda, and me. Linda's face didn't change, but her lips twitched like she was trying to hold that tight smile in place. Claire, sitting beside her, froze mid-sip, her wine glass hovering. I reached for James's hand under the table, but he pulled away, just slightly, his eyes fixed on his mom. That small gesture stung worse than Linda's words. Dad continued, his voice low but firm, like he was laying bricks. Emma's my world. She's worked hard, loved fiercely, and given everything to this marriage. So when I hear whispers, cowardly whispers, that she's not good enough, I wonder what kind of family thinks that's okay to say on her wedding day. The room was dead quiet now, forks clinking forgotten on plates. My cousin Jenny, sitting near the back, covered her mouth, her eyes wide. Even Sarah, my rock, looked shaken, her hand gripping her napkin. Linda shifted in her seat, her smile gone, replaced by a cold, defiant stare. Claire whispered something to her, but Linda waved her off, her eyes never leaving Dad. The tension was a living thing, coiling tighter with every second. I wanted to stand, to say something, to stop this before it spiraled, but my legs felt like lead. James leaned toward me, his voice barely a whisper. Emma, let's just let it go. But I couldn't. Not now. Then Claire stood, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is ridiculous, she said, her voice high and sharp, cutting through the silence. You're making a scene over nothing, Michael. Mom was just joking. She laughed, but it was forced, brittle, like glass about to shatter. A few guests exchanged glances, unsure whether to believe her. I didn't. I'd heard the venom in Linda's voice, and so had Dad. Joking? Dad repeated, his tone dry as dust. He turned to the crowd, his eyes scanning the room. Anyone else think it's funny to call the bride a mistake on her wedding day? No one answered. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning. My Aunt Susan, always the peacemaker, tried to laugh it off, but it died in her throat when she saw Dad's face. Linda finally spoke, her voice calm but icy, like she was addressing a boardroom instead of a wedding. Michael, you're blowing this out of proportion. I love my son, and I want what's best for him. That's all. She glanced at me, her eyes narrowing just enough to make my skin crawl. Emma's lovely, but marriage is hard, and I know my son deserves someone who can keep up. The words hit like a punch. Keep up? With what? James's career? His family's money? Their perfect Charleston pedigree? I'd spent years proving myself, building my design business, supporting Uzziah, supporting James through late nights and early mornings, planning this wedding together. And now this. I felt my cheeks burn, not just from embarrassment, but from anger. I wasn't some small-town nobody. I was Emma, and I deserved better. The crowd was buzzing now, whispers spreading like wildfire. My friend Matt, sitting near the bar, shook his head, his jaw tight. Sarah grabbed my hand under the table, squeezing hard. James was staring at his plate, his knuckles white around his fork. I wanted him to say something, to defend me, but he just sat there, silent. That hurt worse than Linda's words. Then another voice cut through, a sharp, familiar one. That's enough. It was my dad again, stepping away from his table, mic still in hand. He pointed at Linda, his voice steady but dangerous. You don't get to sit there and tear my daughter down in front of everyone. You've got a problem with her, you say it to my face. The room erupted in murmurs. Linda's face flushed, but she didn't back down. I'm just being honest, Michael. James is my son, and I know him better than anyone. He needs someone stronger. The word landed like a slap, and I felt James flinch beside me. Stronger. The word echoed in my head, twisting the knife. I thought of all the nights I'd stayed up with James, helping him study, cheering him on, believing in us. And now his mother was saying I wasn't enough. I looked at him, waiting for him to stand up, to say something. Anything. But he didn't. His eyes stayed on the table, and my heart cracked. Claire jumped in again, her voice louder now. This is embarrassing, Emma. Tell your dad to sit down. He's ruining everything. She shot me a look like I was the one causing trouble. A few of James's cousins nodded, their faces smug. My stomach churned. Was this what they all thought? That I was some mistake? Dad wasn't done. He stepped closer to the head table, his eyes burning. Ruin him? He said, repeating Linda's earlier words, each syllable dripping with disgust. You think my daughter's the one who's gonna ruin your son? Maybe you should look at your own family first. He turned to the crowd, his voice rising. Because I've got a few things to say about that. The room froze. Every eye was on him. My heart was in my throat, my hands shaking. What did he mean? What did he know? The whispers grew louder, and I saw Linda's face go white. James finally looked up, his eyes wide with panic. Whatever Dad was about to say, it was going to change everything. The ballroom felt like a pressure cooker, every whisper and glance adding to the heat. My dad stood at the center of it all, mic in hand, his voice steady but laced with a fury I'd rarely seen. His words hung in the air. Maybe you should look at your own family first. The guests were statue still, their eyes darting between Dad, Linda, and me. I could feel my pulse in my ears, my hands clammy against the lace of my dress. James's face was a mask of dread, his eyes pleading with me, but for what? To stop this? To let it go? I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Linda's composure cracked just for a second. Her hand gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. Michael, she said, her voice sharp but unsteady, this is not the time or place. Sit down. It wasn't a request. It was an order, delivered with the kind of authority she'd probably used her whole life to silence people. But Dad wasn't one of her Charleston society pawns. He was a steelworker's son from Ohio, and he didn't back down. Time and place? Dad shot back, his voice rising. You think it's the time to whisper poison about my daughter on her wedding day? In front of her family, her friends? He turned to the crowd, his eyes blazing. You all heard it. She said Emma would ruin my son-in-law. But let me tell you something about ruining people. He paused, letting the words sink in, and the room was so quiet I could hear the faint clink of a glass being set down. I looked at James, desperate for him to step in, to say something, anything, to stop this train from crashing. But he was frozen, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on his mom. Claire, meanwhile, was on her feet again, her face red. "This is absurd," she snapped, tossing her napkin on the table. "You're twisting everything, Michael. Mom didn't mean it like that. You're embarrassing Emma, embarrassing all of us." A few of James's relatives nodded, murmuring agreement, and my stomach twisted. Were they all against me? Dad ignored her. He stepped closer to the head table, the mic amplifying every word. "Linda, you've been throwing shade at Emma since the day you met her. Little comments about her job, her family, where she's from. You think I didn't notice? You think Emma didn't notice?" My throat tightened. He was right. I'd felt every jab, every backhanded compliment, but I'd swallowed them for James's sake. Now they were spilling out, raw and exposed, in front of everyone. The crowd was buzzing now, a low hum of shock and curiosity. My cousin Jenny leaned forward, her eyes wide. Sarah squeezed my hand so hard it hurt, her face a mix of anger and worry. I wanted to disappear, to run from the ballroom and never look back. But I couldn't. Not with Dad standing there fighting for me. Then Dad dropped the bomb. "You want to talk about ruining people?" he said, his voice low and dangerous. "How about we talk about what you did to your own son?" The room gasped, a collective intake of breath that sucked the air out. Linda's face went white, her eyes wide with something I hadn't seen before. Fear. Claire's mouth fell open, and James looked like he'd been punched, his hands gripping the table. "What are you talking about?" Linda said, her voice barely above a whisper, but the mic caught it, broadcasting her panic to every corner of the room. Dad didn't flinch. "You know exactly what I'm talking about," he said. "You think I didn't do my homework? You think I'd let my daughter marry into a family without knowing who they really are?" He turned to the crowd, his voice steady but searing. "This woman, this mother, has been pulling strings behind James's back for years, controlling his choices, his career, his life. And now she's trying to control his marriage." The room erupted in whispers, heads turning, eyes wide. I felt like I was floating outside my body, watching this unfold like a movie. James's hand finally reached for mine, but it was too late. I pulled away, my heart racing. What did Dad know? What had Linda done? I looked at her, searching for a crack in her facade, and I saw it. Her hands were shaking, her perfect mask slipping. Dad wasn't done. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. "You told Emma she'd ruin him, but you're the one who's been holding him back. You're the one who pushed him into law school when he wanted to teach. You're the one who made him feel like he'd never be enough unless he lived up to your name." He paused, letting the words land like blows. "And you're the one who tried to sabotage this wedding because you can't stand losing control." The crowd was silent now, every eye on Linda. She stood, her chair scraping loudly, her face a mix of rage and desperation. "That's enough!" she shouted, her voice cracking. "You have no right to say these things." But Dad didn't stop. He turned to James, his eyes softening for the first time. "Son, I know you love my daughter, but you've got to stand up to her. For Emma, for yourself." James's face crumpled and I saw it. A flicker of guilt, of pain, of truth. My heart stopped. Did he know something? Had he been hiding it? Before I could process it, Dad turned back to the crowd, mic raised. "And there's one more thing," he said, his voice like thunder. "Linda, you want to tell everyone about the letter you sent Emma last week? Or should I?" The room exploded in gasps. A letter? My mind raced. I hadn't seen any letter. What was he talking about? Linda's face went ashen, her hands clutching the table like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Claire was shouting now, something about lies and defamation, but no one was listening. Every eye was on Dad, on Linda, on me. Dad held up a folded piece of paper, his hand steady, "This," he said, "is what she really thinks of my daughter." He unfolded it, his eyes scanning the page, and the room waited, breathless, for the truth to come out. The ballroom was a frozen tableau, every guest leaning forward, eyes wide, breaths held. My dad stood tall, the folded paper in his hand like a loaded gun. Linda's face was a mask of panic, her eyes darting to Claire, to James, to the crowd, searching for an escape. I felt my heart hammering, my mind spinning. A letter? What letter? I hadn't seen anything, but the way Dad's voice trembled with righteous anger told me this was real, and it was big. Dad unfolded the paper slowly, deliberately, letting the silence stretch until it was unbearable. "Last week," he said, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Linda sent my daughter a letter. She thought Emma wouldn't share it, thought she could keep it quiet. But I found it, tucked away in Emma's things, because she was too ashamed to tell anyone." He looked at me, his eyes soft but fierce. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. You shouldn't have carried this alone." My stomach dropped. I remembered now. A plain envelope slipped into my purse after the rehearsal dinner, Linda's neat handwriting on the front. I'd opened it alone late that night and read words so cruel they'd left me shaking. "You're not right for him. You'll drag him down. Leave now before it's too late." I'd crumpled it up, shoved it in a drawer, told myself it didn't matter, but it did. And now Dad was holding it up for the world to see. He cleared his throat and read aloud, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "Emma, you seem like a nice girl, but James deserves better. His future is bright, and you'll only hold him back. If you love him, you'll let him go." Gasps echoed through the room, sharp and jagged. My cousin Jenny covered her mouth, tears in her eyes. Sarah's grip on my hand tightened, her face a storm of anger. The guests were whispering, some shaking their heads, others glaring at Linda. Dad lowered the paper, his eyes locked on Linda. "You wrote this," he said. "Not a question, but a verdict. You tried to scare my daughter out of her own wedding. You called her a mistake, said she'd ruin him, and you thought you could get away with it." The room was electric, every word landing like a spark. Linda opened her mouth, but nothing came out. For the first time, she looked small, exposed, her perfect facade shattered. James stood, his chair scraping loudly. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking, "is this true?" His eyes were wild, searching her face for a denial, for anything to make this not real. But Linda just stared at him, her lips trembling, and that silence said everything. Claire jumped in, her voice shrill. "She was just trying to protect you, James. She didn't mean it like that." But the crowd wasn't buying it. Murmurs turned to mutters, heads shaking, eyes narrowing. Then James turned to me, his face crumpling. "Emma, I didn't know," he whispered, loud enough for the mic to catch. "I swear, I didn't know." Tears stung my eyes, but I couldn't speak. The hurt was too raw, the betrayal too fresh. I wanted to believe him, but why hadn't he stood up sooner? Why hadn't he seen it? The crowd was restless now, some guests whispering furiously, others staring at Linda like she was a villain unmasked. My Aunt Susan stood, her voice shaking but firm. "That's disgraceful, Linda. How could you do that to Emma?" A few others nodded, their faces a mix of shock and disgust. Linda's friends, seated near her, looked away, their silence damning. Claire tried to rally, shouting something about family loyalty, but it was drowned out by the crowd's growing unrest. Dad handed the mic back to the DJ, his point made, and sat down beside me. He took my hand, his rough fingers steadying me. "You're enough, Emma," he whispered. "You've always been enough." I nodded, tears spilling over, my heart a tangle of love and pain. James took my other hand, his eyes pleading. "Emma, please," he said, his voice low. "I love you. I choose you." And for the first time that night, he stood up to his mother. He turned to Linda, his voice shaking but firm. "Mom, you're wrong. Emma's not ruining me. She's saving me. From you." The room erupted in applause, sharp and sudden like a dam breaking. Linda flinched, her face crumpling, and Claire sank into her seat defeated. The rest of the reception was a blur. Some guests left early, whispering about the drama. Others stayed, offering me hugs, kind words, their support a quiet balm. Linda and Claire slipped out before the cake was cut, their absence loud. James and I danced our first dance, but it felt different. Fragile, like we were holding something that could still break. We talked later, alone, and he swore he'd set boundaries with his family. I believed him, but trust would take time. Months later, I heard Linda apologized, but it was through Claire, not to my face. James cut contact with her for a while, and we're working on rebuilding, step by step. My dad? He's still my hero, the man who stood up when I couldn't. Looking back, I think about love. How it's messy, how it's tested, how it survives. Weddings are supposed to be perfect, but life isn't. It's in the cracks, the fights, the truths that come out, that you find what's real. So, what do you think? Was my dad right to call her out, or should he have let it go? Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if this story hit you, hit that subscribe button. There's more where this came from.